Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the 3D Podcast, where we speak to real practitioners that are making real change in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I'm excited for our show today as we're speaking to no other than Ron Taylor. Ron is the Executive Vice President and U.S. Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Natixis Investment Managers. Ron has more than 20 years of experience developing, implementing, and expanding diversity and inclusion initiatives. Prior to Natixis, Ron served as the Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Mizuho, Diversity Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Diversity Consultant to Eisenamper, the Food Bank for New York City, and the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants. Ron is a member of the advisory board for Bronx Community College and is a lifetime member of the National Association of Black Accountants. He is a past recipient of Michigan Association of CPA Diversity Award and served on Harlem's Board of Directors for Major League Baseball's Reviving Baseball in Inner Cities program and St. Anthony High School's Board of Trustees. Look, I'm excited. I hope you're excited for this discussion. So without further ado, Ron Taylor. So Ron, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Cedric.
Awesome. Well, look, I'm excited to have this discussion today, and I know the audience is excited as well. So, just to kind of start things off, just to kind of get a base level and a grounding, and so that the listeners can get a more in-depth understanding of who you are. Could you take some time just to, share a little bit about your background, to go a little bit deeper? Most importantly, like, how did you get into the field, into the area of diversity and inclusion, and just overall, like, who is Ron?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll actually open, Cedric, with the disclaimer that I'm required to provide, that the remarks that I'm going to make today are my own and don't necessarily reflect Mizuho or Mizuho Americas. But I think, just going way back and, born and raised in Boston, fortunate enough to have an opportunity to, even though growing up in the inner city where schooling wasn't as much of a priority, but having an opportunity to participate in a busing program where I attended school at a predominantly white suburban school system, and so got a really good education. But also, I think it really kind of pointed out for me some of the glaring discrepancies in how different areas were treated. And so if you looked at my zip code, schooling wasn't as much of a priority. And as a matter of fact, back then, it was actually something that didn't get a lot of attention, a lot of serious attention. You looked at the zip code of the school system where it's going, there was tons of resources. And so I'd say around 16, I really started to question some of that. And I really started to question, well, why can't I get a good education? So I've always been, I guess, a diversity troublemaker, if you will. And I'll share a funny story with you. When I graduated from high school and I marched and the principal shook my hand and handed me my diploma, he said, "I am so glad to see you leave," because I challenged him. I challenged that system pretty regularly from probably sophomore year on. And so by the time I left, I know that he was really happy not to have those diversity discussions with me. So I think diversity has always been in my blood. Coming out of high school, I actually started working with kids in residential treatment and working with kids in a number of different capacities, but primarily 6 to 14-year-olds in residential treatment, where I had a real opportunity to engage with 10 to 14-year-old Black males who really didn't have male figures at home, or father figures at home, or male figures in their lives. So really good work, and really felt like I was making a difference. And again, very community-based, very tied to diversity in a lot of ways. That work was probably the most rewarding work that I've done. The challenge with it was that you didn't make any money. And so I had to make a conscious decision to go back to school. I went back to school for an accounting degree, very specifically because accounting, Big Six public accounting paid enough money coming out of an undergrad. So that's what I did. And even while I was doing the accounting work with a big six firm here in New York, I was still tied to the diversity work for them. So I wasn't getting paid for it yet, but I was very active in sort of serving as a liaison with the different diverse partner organizations that we had, going on campus, doing presentations, helping with the diversity recruiting, all of those things while still being a financial service auditor for that firm. So it was pretty apparent to me when I got my CPA and made manager with that firm that I was more passionate about diversity and inclusion and really moving the needle in corporate. So I went to the partners after the 5 years, went to the partners there and said, I don't want to do accounting anymore. I'm really much more interested in the diversity work that I've been supporting sort of on the side. And, we were able to work out a deal where I literally stayed with them for the next 5 years and in a diversity capacity. They crafted a job description that fit perfectly with the things that I was very passionate about and really wanted to help drive within the organization. And so that was my official transition into diversity. And that was 19 years ago. That's how I came to get into the space. I think that was a longer answer than maybe you were looking for, but there's even more. But I'll stop there.
No. I want to dig into that, for a moment. Just think about, being in that, starting into this journey kind of 18 plus years ago. Over time, from your vantage point, what have you seen, whether in the space where things have either changed or things that have just kind of remained the same that probably shouldn't remain the same?
Yeah, no, that's another really good question. And I'll be very candid. So this is why I have to always give my disclaimer, because I could get in trouble. Not a lot has changed in the 19 years. When I came into this space 19 years ago, I knew I was working with some of the smartest people in corporate. And we knew that we had this challenge where there wasn't diverse representation, there wasn't diverse engagement within the organization. But I said, if we point out the challenge, we're working with the smartest people. This should be something that I maybe do for 3 or 5 years, tops, and then on to the next thing. I will say that there's something that has prevented this from moving forward in a meaningful way. So I will say, with some of the progress that's been made, especially within corporate and financial services, I don't think it's been nearly enough. And I think there are a couple of challenges there that kind of hinder that progress.
Oh, that kind of leads us into kind of thinking about some of those challenges. What, just, name it one or two, right? What would be some of those challenges that you've seen?
So back in 2001, Mahzarin Banaji was one of the co-founders of the implicit association testing coming out of Harvard. And that's an online test you can take to help measure where you may exhibit bias, where unconscious bias may be factoring into like your decision making and that sort of thing. The challenge was, we got the tool, we got unconscious bias, we understand it, you hear everybody talking about it today, but we understand it very academically. And we, and I say collective, we have not put the work in to really help understand, mitigate, and sort of change behavior. So I think that's one of the things that's been a true stumbling block. And you'll talk to a lot of people that will say, well, no, unconscious bias, we get it. We all have it. Big deal. That's just a start. It really has to be, okay, in my day-to-day, and it is a day-to-day kind of battle, how am I making sure that bias and unconscious bias is not creeping into my decision-making? How am I making sure that I'm making decisions that aren't, and it's hard in financial services because things are moving quickly and you need to get things done. And so you want to get, you go to the go-to person and, all of those things will impede progress in diversity and inclusion.
No, understood. Thanks for providing that. If we go down this discussion and we think about this conversation for today, and we think about diversity and inclusion inside of an organization, can you explain or walk us through, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, how do you communicate this to the organization so that when you're starting this journey, everyone is either starting from the same place or seeing it the same way so that you can move this mission forward?
No, thanks for that question, Cedric. It's challenging to come in and kind of blanket. And you definitely want that foundation. You want that same starting point. You want people kind of seeing this, working towards it, knowing what they're working towards and why they're working towards it. But I think what I've found is that, the diversity and inclusion journey is so personal for so many different people, and especially leaders. And so a lot of the aha moments that I get from leaders in terms of helping them to get sort of that foundational understanding really comes from their personal journeys. And in order to get to the personal journeys, you have to have a trust relationship, and you have to, have a credible relationship, and you have to really one-on-one to just understand what's your socialization towards. Forget the company line. Forget what the company says we need to do. Even if it's targets or whatever, we need to have X number of, fill in the blank. Forget that for a minute. Let me talk to you about who you are, why this is important to you, why maybe it's not so important to you, and come away from that company line. And I think that's where I've seen the most impact. I'll do programs, I'll do leadership, sessions where, we'll have somebody come in or myself will come in and talk to a collective group of leaders. That's nice. And I think it does help with awareness. I don't know if it necessarily helps with behavioral change. And I do think it's that hand-to-hand combat of sitting down, understanding what keeps somebody up at night. What's been the challenge with getting diverse representation as a first step into your group or team or function? But then, are they being engaged? Are they being recognized? Are they being included? Do they feel that sense of belonging? And what's your role in making that happen? You want that foundation of, yes, this is important and it is the right thing to do and it's going to help drive profitability and et cetera. You want that basic understanding. I think the real work of uncovering some of those fears and misconceptions and stereotypes that happens at an individual level is equally as important.
So just to add a comment to that, when you think about what's happening in the organization, when we think about systems and we think about, processes and we think about diversity and inclusion overall, one of the things that we have to just stay focused on, and you kind of mentioned, is around the actual individual and the person, right? So when we look at and we think about what they're bringing to the table, right, everyone has some type of baggage, right, personally in their lives, what they're going through and what they've experienced. And until you dig into that baggage, until you dig into what they bring and how they can use that, it's one of those things that we look at. And a lot of times we think that, hey, we can solve this issue by, doing more events or, speaking about, various different cultures and things of that nature, when we haven't dug into the individual, right? And there's been a lot of studies around like the Deloitte stuff, and there have been a lot of studies around various different consulting companies talking about adding diversity can impact the bottom line, when in actuality is more of a correlation versus the actual cause, right, of what you're trying to get from an impact perspective. And how we look at, once we bring those individuals in, now how do we understand them, learn from them, and then use that to go out and move this forward is critical when we're going out and doing this work. And so I definitely want to add that comment because it made me think about that. But when we go through and as we're thinking through like what you all are doing internally, I'm interested, right? When you think about now being into a new year, as you think about, what's moving forward, you don't have to go specific into everything, but, what are some of the big things that you're working on, or some of the, the top two things that you're focusing on as it relates to diversity and inclusion when it comes to the work that you do today?
And I wanted to go back to that point that you were opining on. When I get a leader that says, well, we just need X percentage of women, or X percentage of Blacks, or X percent of Latin Hispanics, I always push them back and I say, well, when we get to that number, then what? The other pushback I always give is, we're not all the same, right? Cedric's background, Cedric's experiences, what Cedric brings to the table as an academic recommend is going to be the exact same as what I bring to the table. So just having both of us at the table isn't the success metric. It's really understanding what we bring as diverse professionals coming into the practice. So I think a lot of focus has been put on the diversity piece of it and the numbers piece of it and the numbers game, and very little, maybe a little more recently, on the inclusion and engagement and the belonging. Not all Blacks are the same.
I agree.
And I think,
I agree.
If you start with that, then you're already kind of behind the game.
Real quick, just to add to that, is that I don't know if you've looked at it, but there's been some work done by, I believe it's David Thomas and Robin Eli, and they had an article that actually just came out end of last year for HBR that went into, I think it's titled "Getting Serious About Diversity Enough Already with the Business Case." In that piece, it goes through bringing people into an organization. How do you now shift to this aspect of this learning paradigm in order to now really get the benefits and really activate the inclusion aspect of now that you have people here? So what's next?
When I think about even my own DE&I journey, when I came into the space back in 2002, all of the focus was on pipeline and numbers. And that's how we measured success. And I'd like to have seen a slight shift few years of companies really trying to get the inclusion side of the equation and really trying to tackle it. But I will say that, that's a relatively new shift, and it's a harder part. And it's probably why it was ignored for so long, because inclusion is hard. You can get Ron Taylor into an organization, you can get Cedric into it, you can get any number of talented, professional, diverse talent into an organization. But then the inclusion piece is what really is going to be the distinguishing, the driving factor. Are they in there? Are they engaged? Are they included? Do they feel a sense of belonging? When they speak up, are they, all of those things that happen with inclusion. So, the diversity is important and the representation is important. But I think the harder work is the inclusion work. But I also think it gives the better sort of outcomes if you can focus there.
Awesome. Yeah. So just to make sure that we don't miss it, when we think about for you and the work that you're doing today, what are those two, maybe three things that you're focusing on as it relates to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. I've been with Mizuho now for just 6 months. I came in early July, obviously in the middle of a lot that was going on in terms of racial unrest and coming off of the George Floyd murder and just other instances that had happened. And so one thing that I started and was doing before I came over, I was with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, was just diversity dialogues. And those dialogues are really an opportunity so to back up before I describe the diversity dialogues, there's always been these two lives that we've had to live as diverse professionals. We have our personal lives and what goes on personally, and we'll come through the doors of our organizations and we kind of put up this shield or this force field, and we have to become these other people. So all that stuff that happens externally with George Floyd, that really it just became too hard to continue to live those two separate lives. And so I think for the first time I saw organizations, including the Fed and now including Mizuho, allowing people, and back to your point about it's about the people, allowing people to really express who they are outside of the technical work or outside of just the technical work. Here are the things that are keeping me up at night. So these diversity dialogues that we established, or that I established here at Mizuho, were really an opportunity first for the leaders, that spent a lot of time with the leaders of our different divisions. Back to the point of, who are you? How have you been socialized to this issue? Why is this important to you? I need you to kick this off, and I need you to share some of who you are in this discussion. And I'll tell you that, for as apprehensive as they were to do that, it was phenomenal. It's been phenomenal. And so, leading these diversity dialogues, doing them by division. So it's a big chunk of individuals, 200 to 300 people, sometimes more. And then just allowing employees, not overly scripted, to share their pain, their frustration, their emotion, their fear within the corporate walls. And I think that's been incredibly, sorry about that pause there. I don't know where these beats are coming from. Yeah, so I was saying, allowing people to really come in and be people and not just these, functional individuals that come in and get the work done and then go home and fall apart or get racially profiled or worrying about their kids or worrying about their parents or worrying about some of the other inequities that have been surfaced through COVID. It's been different. It's absolutely been different from both a leader's perspective and also from an employee perspective to bring these conversations into the workplace. So that's the thing that I would highlight that I think has been the most different in the work that I've been doing. Like having these honest, tough, professionally uncomfortable conversations where people want to talk about religion, they want to talk about politics. We're finding ways to allow for those conversations. And it's tough because you know that there are, varying opinions and different things, and creating those safe spaces for people to have that open, honest dialogue, I think has been one of the more impactful things that I've been involved with.
No, look, I think that's great. And I like the way that you position it, because we do diversity dialogues as well. And just in what you just said, I have this thought, this mindset, and I tell it to a lot of leaders in this space, it's around wasted opportunities. And, you think about the different opportunities that you have as a leader, right? When you can show and demonstrate that ability to lead, if you don't capture it and use that opportunity when it comes, then it's going to be it's a chance that you could lose the organization in that process, right? And with everything that we have going on, this is one of those opportunities to where it sounds like with your diversity dialogues, leaders aren't wasting that opportunity to go out and actually have these connections and make these connections with the broader organization. And so my question to you, just thinking about those dialogues, there's kind of two parts here. One is, how do you have that discussion with leaders to make sure that they know that having this dialogue, going through this more personalized story is a strength and not a weakness? And then I guess the second part of that question is, when employees then begin to share, their frustrations or what they've been experiencing, how then does leadership take hold of that information and turn it into like the next piece so that employees just don't feel like they're sharing things, but then nothing's happening?
Yeah, those are two really good points, and definitely look at those as we establish these. So I spent a lot of prep time with the individual leaders, to the point I made earlier of, really understanding who they were and why this diversity and inclusion thing. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of them were, initially very hesitant, very apprehensive, and very, this is how I grew up in the investment banking world. You did not share person. I don't even talk about my kid, things like that. So this was new ground for them. So there was a lot of hand-holding that went into discussions with them. I would say on average, spent 2 hours with each of the different divisional leaders before the fact, and really helping them to understand that, introducing your personal, how you feel about what's going on, introducing that into your workspace, introducing that to your teams is actually going to be a strength, because so many folks look at vulnerability as a weakness. If I'm a leader, I have to be Superman. I can't show emotion. I just need to lead. I need to make this place money. So there was a lot of sort of hand-holding to get them to understand and to recognize that, being vulnerable is probably one of the strongest leadership traits that you could evidence in front of your employees. So that was that part of it. And then for the sessions themselves, so this is just the beginning. So very clear, and I helped to facilitate with those leaders, very clear that these aren't solutioning sessions for the folks that are sharing, that this is really a listening session, that this is the beginning of something. We need to, we can't solve if we don't know what the problem is. We don't want leaders coming in and saying, well, we're going to put together a project team and we're going to fix this diversity, this racial inequity thing that's happening. So we really wanted to listen first. And so that's kind of where we are in the journey. But with the promise that, there'd be a couple of things, that the resources and educational things that folks that we would provide, that people could use to educate themselves on the issue. Because I'll tell you, people, there was some really bold, and I was really encouraged by some of the white male and females that spoke up during these sessions. So it wasn't just, and I call it FUBU, for us, by us. This was really a collective. And there were folks who shared, in mixed relationships with mixed race kids, white women married to black men with mixed race kids and sharing their experiences. So it was a lot of sharing and listening with the promise that action was to come, and action based on the education that we could share, and creating smaller groups, because these were relatively large groups. I'm in the process of putting together a plan for convening smaller groups of individuals across the organization to have some more of those conversations, because I think there is a lot of listening that needs to happen to just get away from the sort of the assumptions that, oh yeah, I know you, I know who you are. Well, no, you don't. If you've never heard my story from me, you have no idea. You know who I present when I come to the corporate doors. You have no idea who I am. And so I think that was an important first step in these dialogues.
No, that's awesome. And so, as someone listening to this podcast and they're thinking about, hey, I really want to do these diversity dialogues, but I know that I have some leaders, because of things that we've tried, that just aren't going to do this or have been resistant to this type of work. What kind of advice could you give to approach those leaders who may not just be, I'm excited to have these dialogues, help me get through, coach me, so I can know what I need to do and say? Like, what advice would you give them for people who have resistance in their leadership when it comes to this aspect?
Yeah, I will say that I don't know if any of my leaders are excited about doing this. I think they're all a little terrified. But I think they need that trusted advisor. They need to know that it's not, we're out to get you. And I joke sometimes, and maybe I shouldn't. I say, it's not like I've got Al Sharpton on speed dial and we're out to get you. We really want to help you collectively be a better leader. And there's a trusted advisor. And I think, I said, I spend on average 2 hours with each of the leaders individually as we prep for those sessions. So I think you really need somebody who's got that patience, who's got that understanding of how important that vulnerability is for the leader, really helping them to see that vision. And yeah, they absolutely were not excited. And I will say that most of them got super emotional sharing their stories, which was something else that was very new for them in front of their employees. But yeah, did any of them come running to me and say that I want to do this? No. It was definitely me suggesting that, this was something that would help position them with their employee base, period, not just the diverse employee base, but really, by not saying anything, they were doing more damage than if they said the wrong thing, which is probably the thing I heard the most, in those prep sessions. I'm so afraid of saying the wrong thing. Getting them and convincing them that not saying anything, like looking at something like George Floyd's murder or even the thing that just came out, Jacob Blake. I got an email from one of our division leaders in Chicago, when it came out. Hey, not saying anything is worse than saying the wrong thing. So I think there was a lot of time spent there as well.
I saw some stuff on the Jacob Blake, and I think it was around like not prosecuting the officer, breaking up charges around it. And these are things that impact the organization because, like I said, we are people, right? We see ourselves, individuals as it gets cascaded across the news and across, media and things of that nature. So to see, various type of situations happen, injustice happens, or however it may be, and then nothing comes out of it or no consequences, I know can be, heartening, right? As we think about morale and internally. Kind of coming to the end here, having a question, when you think about your leaders and you think about talent and we think about diversity dialogues, there's been a recent study over the last year when I think it was towards the end of last year to where children under the age of 15 finally hit above that 50% when it comes to, being, children of color. I think it was 50.1. And so when we think about this as it relates to organizations and we're thinking about the organization makeup today and then how different it's going to look with the next generation coming in the next 3 to 6 years, how are you preparing your leaders for that transition? Because we mentioned a little bit about it before, but the process, how they think, their mindset, not being afraid to say certain things that breaks away from a traditional corporate environment. But how are you preparing your leaders for that new workforce that's coming in, even today, right? To make sure that in 3 to 5 years, this is what's going to happen. And we need to prepare for that to happen. And this is what we need to do today to make sure that when that happens, we're ready.
Yeah, for me, and again, it goes back to that, I'll call it hand-to-hand combat with these conversations. It's a question to those leaders. Do you want to be a good leader today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What's that going to take? The demographics are changing. You're getting a more diverse workforce. And I think you touched on it before, and it really comes back to the human aspect, the humanity, the human aspect of your people. Yes, you want somebody to come in that's technically smart. You want somebody to come in that's going to help to grow the organization. That person in the future may not necessarily look like you. And so you need to, as a leader, you need to adapt. And any leader that's not adaptable or flexible or can pivot is probably not going to be in a leadership position for very long. Take away the diversity just in general. So you need to help them, give them that tool, that resource in their belt that's going to help them to understand this is human. And it's going to come to me from a couple of different places, and I'm not going to understand. But I think having the conversation, having a conversation with me about my super humble beginnings or, that next star investment banking minority female or male that's coming in, really understanding who they are is going to be equally as important as understanding the technical expertise that they bring. I think any leader that wants to be good going forward has to understand the importance of understanding your people and knowing your people and knowing how to motivate their people, even if their people don't look just like them.
I agree. I like that. For those who are listening to this episode and those who are, working through this and just trying to, as D&I professionals, figure out how can they go make an impact, in their organizations. 'Cause I know in a lot of cases, some very few actually have teams to go out and get this done, but a lot of people are doing this on their own, a team of one, or maybe just another person. What advice or what are 2 to 3 things that you could give them, thinking about what we spoke about to where they can actually take this and actually go out and create action in their organization tomorrow that'll help them get on the right path in their D&I journey?
So, Cedric, it's funny, when I came to Mizuho back in July, I was getting all these emails and phone calls from folks across, not even just the Americas, but Tokyo and London. And they were all saying, we're so happy that you're here. You're going to fix everything. We're so happy. And I would just say, whoa, I'm happy you're here because I'm not doing this by myself. And so I really pushed back and made sure that people understood that they had an active role in this diversity and inclusion journeys. And I'm a small team presently, so it's not like I have this huge team covering, the Americas here in Mizuho. We're only about 3,000 people, but, I constantly remind folks that they have skin in this game, no pun intended. This isn't a one-man band that I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix Mizuho or I'm going to fix any organization. So I'm constantly making sure that people see their role in this journey, help them to see the vision for what it needs to be and why it needs to be and how it's going to be successful, but most importantly, how they play a very significant role in that transition. So I'd say be encouraged. There are days, I'll be honest, there are days when I'm just like, I don't want to play anymore. It gets super frustrating. Just be patient and then leverage every champion, every person to really help you champion and move this forward.
No, awesome. Thanks for that. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, do you have any shout outs, any parting words, and where can people find you if they would like to connect with you and dive deeper into your thoughts?
Yeah, so no shout outs. I thought about that. I don't have any shout outs. I will say I'm a self-professed LinkedIn junkie. There's a lot of really good content and a lot of really good discussions out there around diversity and inclusion. So Ronald Taylor, CPA, is my name on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to kind of reach out. Again, there's a lot of really good content that I rely on LinkedIn, a lot of things that are shared there. But I love to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I think that's how we connected. Proof is there.
No, great. Well, look, that does it for us. Look, thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of 3D Podcast. This is Cedric, and you've been listening to Ron Taylor, Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Mizuho Americas. We out. Awesome. Well, that does it for us. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the 3D Podcast. If you would like to connect on social media, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Cedric Empowers. And if you have any questions you'd like me to read or answer on the show, or just want to know more about my thoughts around diversity and inclusion, entrepreneurship, or just overall business, you can text me. Yes, I said text me at 770-285-0404. You'll receive content straight to your phone on a regular basis, and you can message back and forth with me. Not a bot or an assistant. All responses come directly from me. Well, look, this has been a great episode. Until next week, this has been Cedric Chambers, and you have been listening to the 3D Podcast. We out.